Yes.
And so we should press the got it button, should we?
Right. And I'm going to leave you to your conversation then.
Okay, so and I'm going to just record it to the cloud. So just making sure, Evelina, let me know if this is already there, because YouTube I can see it's come up.
Yeah,
but I don't know about LinkedIn Live. Yeah.
Yeah, you just have your conversation and the rest I will check.
Yeah,
it says it's recording live, so it should be all good.
Yeah, but check on LinkedIn.
Yes, I will.
Yeah, because then we can drop off. You can drop off, and then because I'm not sure if it's working on LinkedIn yet. Oh yes, it is.
It is working.
Yeah,
there we go.
All right.
It's live.
All right, cool. So I will start the
great.
recording to the cloud. So no more curse words, no more blaming the other person.
Collaboration is key.
Indeed it is, yes.
All right, I'll leave you to it.
All right,
thanks for your help. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, so let's get started. Hello and welcome everybody in whatever part of the world you're in. I hope you guys are staying healthy and safe. This is being broadcast live on LinkedIn as well as YouTube as we speak. At the same time, we are video recording it so that it is available on YouTube later on, as well as on Facebook for those of you who will be watching it later, and 8 podcast channels, including Spotify, Google, and Apple. And our topic is a very interesting topic. But before we get started, a bit of a background here. So of the origin of how we came about thinking about this particular topic here, right? So been involved with the shared services industry literally from mid-90s and have seen the evolution of shared services industry since then. What we find is over the last 2.5 decades, we see that much of the way the shared services are managed are still kind of what I call 20th century thinking, and that's why we see that after two and a half decades, especially with the rapidly changing world around us due to technology, and then of course the pandemic, is it time to reinvent GBS or global shared services? GBS in this case being global business services or global shared services and outsourcing world, and that's kind of what spawned the thinking of having a series of roundtable discussions with industry experts on various topics. So we're going to have 6 roundtable discussions. This is the first of the series, so this is kind of a POC as well, and which is why I could bank on some of my industry colleagues who have become friends over the years to sort of experiment and find out if it's working or not. So without further ado, why don't we get started? Our topic is should GBS essentially take advantage of the trends that we see around us and get started. So that's the topic, and I've been joined here by Simon Brown from the UK, Tim Sheridan from Belgium, and Samir Singh from the US. So I will get you gentlemen to, if you could introduce yourselves. So Tim, why don't we start with your introduction?
Okay. Thanks, Anirban, and I feel like a guinea pig now helping you test this out. I'm the founder and managing partner of Connected Insight. My background in shared services, GBS, goes back a long ways, about 25 years, and spent 15 years with EY and Capgemini in their consulting practice, spent 5 years working internally, leading a transformation program and shared services startup for a large Fortune 100 company. And in the past 5 years, my focus has been Connected Insight, which is a transformation analytics platform that companies use to drive improvements in focus, cost, and agility, including GBS. So thank you. Happy to be here.
Awesome, Tim. Good to have you here as well. Samir.
Thanks. Well, thanks for the opportunity, and I guess we can still say Happy New Year to everyone. It still counts till the 31st, I guess. But it's great to be here. go back in terms of the shared services history to the mid-90s as well. My first stint with shared services was accidental when Unilever in India was setting up a shared service to consolidate 3 businesses that they had. And that was basically, completely, out of the corner, something I'd not really focused on. But then over the years, it kept bouncing into the topic. I worked with Oracle Consulting for a while, where I ended up helping clients look at, mostly in the finance and procurement areas, how to get synergies using consolidated operations, and then moved to the US, initially with Arthur Andersen doing similar work, creating shared services across, in the US, as well as helping them look at global locations. And then I guess the turning point for me was GE, where, got an opportunity to work pretty much, as Anirudh will remember, this boundaryless thinking, which was not just about, it wasn't even about where work was done, but it was the way work was done, the way I thought about it. It was completely reinventing business models and operating models. So I think that was a real eye opener to me in terms of just thinking of it beyond process and systems as such, but it was about culture and change management, which really came to the fore and got me really excited about the topic in general. And then since then, I've had a bit of a stint, with Genpact, which was a spinoff of GE at that point in time. So got a chance to see the outside world, so to speak, moving from the sort of inside out services to sort of being a third party provider and the responsibilities and obligations that came with it. And then for the last 8-9 years, I've been with McKinsey, helping clients in the same area, in terms of looking at either starting up shared services, looking at sourcing strategies, and then, as you said, Anirudh, over the last 5 years, I would say, the whole shift towards digital business services, as it's called, it's an exciting area. Every year something new comes up and you get to meet new friends as well. So excited to be here. Thanks.
Wonderful stuff, Samir. And of course, every time you and I we speak, it reminds me of my days back with General Electric, where I guess people like us learned a lot of our skills and our experience. So wonderful to have you in our panel discussion today. Simon.
Thank you. Yes, so hi everybody. My name is Simon Brown. I'm a freelance consultant specializing in change management, talent management, business transformation, coaching, and mentoring. And actually, like the panel here, I started out in shared services back in the mid-90s, so veteran of shared services. I've got 20 years end-to-end experience helping to set up and run 7 HR shared services centers and 3 GBS organizations for pharma, beverages, medical technology, and automotive sectors. So that includes GlaxoSmithKline and the Coca-Cola Company. And very pleased to join you on the panel today.
Awesome, Simon. And we definitely would like to learn a lot from your experience. I guess out of the all of us, you probably have your own sort of fair share of the color of your hair.
Yes, that's experience.
that speaks volume of your experience. So I think this is going to be a good conversation. So as you guys have already seen, let me just share something that I've shared with the panelists, which kind of is the background of our discussion today. So first trend that we see in the 2020s is there are 4+ billion active internet users who are there, and they have been supplemented with 36+ billion IoT devices or Internet of Things devices. This could be printers, this could be set-top boxes that you have, this could be your cars. So there's so many different ways that machines are speaking with other machines connected through internet, right? Now, what some of the industry leaders are saying at this stage is that the next generation of competitive advantage is likely to come through these channels, i.e. the companies that are able to harness the data that's being produced by or through this channel is where the next level of competitive advantage is going to come from. The second piece, and this is something due to the pandemic and then the Omicron, the world has shown us is that we truly live in the VUCA world, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And what we know that the speed at which many organizations, including shared services, had to reinvent themselves, especially in terms of how to manage their workforce, from completely being on-premise to hybrid or to offshore, not offshore, but remote in this case. How do you manage that? The VUCA world is a certainty that is going to exist in the near future. And how does the world of shared services address that? The third thing is, unlike in the 20th century when we saw there was a lot of functional specialization, what we find now is we need to have a lot more cross-functional endeavors than ever before. So for example, when we talk about customer experience, we are bringing in people from customer service, from marketing, from sales, from product management, but also people who deal with data. So data scientists, data analysts, we're bringing them together. In order to support them, we're also bringing in people from technology. And that's why we see a lot more cross-pollinated efforts, a lot more cross-functional endeavors. And the last one is much of the shared services that was started back in the 90s were pioneered by people who belonged to the baby boomers generation. Majority of them have either retired in the last few years or are going to retire in the next few years. And the workforce DNA is being replenished with people who come from the millennials and Generation Z. And these are the people who we call digitally native. These are the people who have a different approach to loyalty. These are the people who have a different concept of how employment should be and what sort of employee experience it needs to be. So these are the global trends that we believe global shared services and global business services needs to look at and see if there are areas of advantage that the shared services organizations can take on and build the next generation shared services of shared services, right? So that's the part of the discussion. So let's get started and let's hear your perspective. Simon, we're going to start with you on your perspective on the topic.
Yeah, I mean, certainly as you've set it out, Anirvan, it really is a period of evolution and rapid change. And what we're seeing is that technology is leading the way in that change. And there's organizations such as Amazon and data communications organizations, telecommunications organizations that are already leveraging data in a big way. And you could look at a parallel here to say that GBS actually is a data hub and a data center. And it's now about how do we leverage that and how do we use that as an organization. And quite rightly, as you mentioned earlier, I'm one of the almost baby boomers, and I've seen rapid change in my lifetime from a point where when I started work, computers were a mainframe which took up 2 rooms at IBM. And now, my daughter, who is in this Generation Z that you've described, is working on 3 social media platforms at the same time and coaching me, to leverage social media. I think you're absolutely right that given all those technology change and given the massive change in terms of how we work and the paradigm shift caused by COVID, we do need to be nimble. And we do need to recognize the needs of our today workforce in order to really continue to grow. It's the evolution of the species and our ability to adapt to the new circumstances will determine our growth. But I do see a big opportunity. If as leaders, we listen to our workforce and understand their needs in a modern world, and B, we really turn this data center that we have at our fingertips into something that is not just transactional, but something that can be really proactive, for businesses.
Excellent. Excellent. And for the people who are watching us on LinkedIn Live or on YouTube, if you have any questions or comments, then use the comment section to put down your comments, and we will try and answer them either through this forum or at a later stage. So just to keep that in mind. Samir, we had this start with Simon. He claimed himself to be between the cusp of baby boomers and sort of the next gen. We are not too far off from that either, right? So what's your take on the topic?
I think Simon hit upon the key points, and the way I look at it is, and I like the evolution that you said, Simon, about the sort of mainframe computers and all, right? And my initial thinking when I first bounced to the topic of GBS was essentially GBS was a clearinghouse, right? If you take the analogy of the banks and financial service institutions, which used to have these third-party clearinghouses, and then you sort of created a internal third-party clearinghouse. That's the way I always looked at GBS. You were throwing a bunch of people who were picking up paper from one end, putting it together. It was I guess you could call it the Ford model, Ford model in services, right? That's what everyone used to talk about Toyota, but actually it was Ford, let's face it, in reality. And then I think the evolution that I saw was, I remember talking to a client of mine like 5 or 6 years ago, actually maybe even earlier than that. And they said, what's the future? And I said, what, if you can go from the clearinghouse to sort of human data warehouse, and I particularly use that word human data warehouse, which is basically, there were people who were pushing data, right? You had moved from sort of paper to now having Excel files flying around, and you had to take data from one place, and then, the old swivel chair work, right? I take this input, set up a customer, I've got to go to 4 different systems and update it and stuff like that. So it became a human data warehouse, essentially. And it's just natural, like you said, Simon, the next evolution is now that technologies come in place, the cost of technology has gone down, technology has become more nimble, the need for speed is there, and therefore, AI, the evolution is there. And people talk about, AI taking jobs and stuff like that. The way I look at it is, I always think of AI, once you think of it like, the Iron Man suit, because let's face it, the reality of AI today is thousands of people sitting behind the scenes, even at, the big, let's say the tech giants, right? I don't take any names here, but there are thousands of people sitting there and manually, overriding or guiding the so-called, intelligent AI systems out there. So to me, it's, the evolution is going to be faster, smarter, and which means it's still going to be humans. They're going to be aided by technology, which makes a lot of sense and takes away a lot of the busy work or that human data warehouse, clearinghouse kind of work. And that's the magic of it. I think we are still in the very early stages. I mean, I'll just give a small example. Recently over the New Year's, I thought I'll take advantage of these New Year sales and went to look at a car. And I was just shocked, and you want to your point, like IoT is like, or maybe I'm just behind the curve, but the stuff like remote start of a car is no longer, through NFC or, some Wi-Fi or something. You can just do it from anywhere in the world, literally. And then, the other thing was, it's so common these days to have, like Amazon, you can have a device, I guess, linked to your garage where you can give the Amazon delivery person your code from anywhere in the world, and they can open the, you can open the door for them literally, and they can, walk in and drop the package off and stuff. So I think that we just touched, the sort of tip of the iceberg, so to speak, because when you combine that capability with video, it just opens up a whole new realm of services.
Yeah.
Great to hear those examples. Now, Tim, let's get your perspectives. I'm looking at the cupboards behind you. They kind of remind me of the mainframe rooms.
It reminds me of the boxes of paper that we used to have, right? You can see how well processes are running. So by walking around looking at the different stacks of paper, and they're shifting from this place over this place. And back in the good old days. Yeah, I think the evolution here is exciting. I think for me, I think that the biggest now dynamic going on within the GBS industry, especially when it comes to thinking about as Simon and Samir described, the expanded role of GBS in terms of data and insight and driving business capabilities is on the GBS side. When you think about that expanding role also requires new capabilities. And now with remote working having proven itself as a proven model, GBS organizations can really expand the net in terms of the types of people, the recruiting, and from where. And then also expand the options for those people coming into the organization in terms of different places they can go with their career path within the organization, and connect those two dots. Because if remote working is here to stay, and we've shown that leaders can lead remotely, workers can work together remotely. And so I think GBS really needs to now think about, with these great new opportunities to build capabilities to support the organization, things that can really dramatically change how they operate in terms of finding those capabilities, giving them experience in the career path options they want, and making those two pieces connect.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, just to kind of extend your perspectives, Simon, Samir, and Tim, what we find is, if you look at an organization, and if you look at which is the most human resource rich and human resource centric organization, the largest, it tends to be the shared services. Tends to be the global business services. One of the trends that I mentioned was about that 4 million plus active internet users and 36 billion plus IoT devices, and we've already alluded to that in our conversations. And Tim, I think you mentioned about the capabilities, new competencies that need to be built in. Samir, you mentioned about that these needs to have a different level of competency that's going to be required. And Simon, you did mention about the data richness. So maybe Samir, I'll start with you. What's the opportunity for a shared services leader who may be watching our show here? What's the opportunity with respect to the external data that comes from these active internet users and IoT devices?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things I would say. One is the fact that, there is already, and it's very industry specific. Let me just step back and say, right? So clearly in certain areas, like if you take pharmaceuticals, the fact there has always been an interchange of external data, let's say clinical trial data, right? If you just take it at that level, which has been part of the research cycle and has been part of the sort of interchange of both outcomes as well as inputs coming in terms of how the product is forming. So that has just been one of the realities of what's there. I think that when you take examples of the wireless telco and the sort of almost, there's a lack of between technology and telco, it's almost like merging, right? Where's content and where's content produced, where's it distributed, and how you're tracking the usage. Netflix is a prime example of something like that. So it's all there. I think the key thing is, which I think people are grappling with right now, is how do you ensure, one, I would say, I don't want to use the word purity, but who owns the IP, right? And when you start looking at data, it becomes very, you need to be very careful about who owns the IP, because data is now the next gold, as they say, right? So, or next oil, I guess. Who owns the IP? Who's owning the value add on top of that, like in terms of taking someone's data and then adding analytics on top of it. And then thirdly, I think there's also an opportunity, like a lot of organizations who've been sitting on pools of data, but not really had the capability to either, access the data or make, merge it with other forms of data and, produce the sort of third variation to it. I think that's the big opportunity out there, which is starting to happen. I'm hearing of, companies wherein that when they're doing their outsourcing deals or even software deals, for example, working with some of the tech companies in terms of using their storage for data analytics, and then also using data analytics engines. But the data they're then providing or using on those platforms can be anonymized and then used by that platform provider to further enhance services to somebody else, and then you become sort of the anchor tenant for that. So I think the bottom line is that I think there's a lot of opportunity, but there's also there's a big gray zone out there in terms of what can be done, and then there's this huge opportunity aspect, which is, I think, very, very early stage. So, overall, it's a very exciting area. That's why you're finding a lot of focus. Unfortunately, I would say that I don't think all GBS organizations are, latching onto that opportunity of analytics. I think for some strange reason, it's still a lot of glitter around, automation and, to use that old saying that I said about, that clearinghouse to human data warehouse, just making that the efficiency aspect is being focused on more versus, the opportunity to look at things more from an optimization perspective, where analytics plays a big role.
Right. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Extending on that thought process, maybe I'll go to Tim and look at what are some of the competencies that shared services organizations need to develop in terms of the opportunity to sort of start mining the external data, and we probably already have examples from the likes of Netflix, as you mentioned, Samir, but also some of the other companies. Amazon is another prime example, Booking.com. What are some of the skills that the shared services teams would need to develop in order to take advantage of the opportunity?
Yeah, I think the challenge there is less about the technical skills, right? It's certainly important, and more about the strategic skills. So I think it's important for GBS to approach this not from hey, we can go source some data and put it together. They need to approach it from the perspective of really understanding what the business opportunity is, what the business need is, and translate that then to what sort of data could we have in order to support our analysis here, and translate that to structured analytics. So it's that front end piece of really understanding the business, really understanding the strategy, or really understanding the opportunity, and then using that knowledge then to translate that to, okay, here's the type of data we can go and get, and here's what we can go and do with this data in order to support this type of decision making or this type of analysis. And that's what really gets GBS into the forefront of leadership, as opposed to being the back office order taker waiting for the phone to ring of, oh, we got a data order here and let me go dial up my technical team here. I think it's more about that front end strategic piece and really understanding and being able to engage with the business.
Right. Yep. Makes sense. Simon, I would extend the competency question a bit and say a lot of the leadership of current shared services come from either baby boomers or Gen X, and we need to have a different outlook in the way we need to start handling some of these opportunities that come through this external data. What would be some of the competencies and the change management part that the shared services guys should develop, or leaders should develop?
Right. Yeah, certainly. I think, as you say, the old framework no longer works. And so as we built up GBS, we tended to have functional silos. We tended to separate GBS from centers of expertise. And then maybe the connection with business partners was not as strong as it could be. So I think the leader of the future needs to think beyond the triangle model and think about how you can leverage talent across the whole organization. Because by doing that, A, you widen your talent pool, B, you improve your career path, and 3, you move from collecting data to proactively using data for management decisions. So I think a leader will need to think outside of the traditional box and think about, well, how can I more closely connect data management with data scientists, and how can I understand more closely the strategic plan for the business in the next 3 years, and how can I provide analytics which helps forecasting for that business. So more of an open mind, I think, to how we structure ourselves, not to be afraid of GDPR, but to respect GDPR, but to recognize, data is the diamond. If you think about people, process, technology, and data, data is the diamond. If we can polish it effectively, it really takes us, to a next generation way of working in GBS. And it closes the gap between GBS as being a transactional center of excellence and the centers of expertise looking at thought leadership. So I think a leader has to really have that new mindset where it's not about boxes, it's not about silos, It's about how can we create, I think, a talent wave rather than a talent pool, because a talent pool could be described as stagnant, but a talent wave is dynamic. How could we leverage that so we're more proactive for the organization?
I like the way you described the talent pool versus talent wave, and I'm going to sort of, potentially use this as part of our report in the report out. On the way I see the current sort of evolution in the world of shared services is that there's some shared services that have really sort of taken a lead and gone to the gone to the extreme end of bringing about changes, and on the other side you still have lots of shared services organizations that are still stuck in the past. And one of the things that we feel is that it's going to be probably a two-staged approach. So in some cases, companies may not be able to leapfrog straight away into sort of the next gen, but they need to reinvent themselves as from pure play cost-centric, transactional and administrative shared services to becoming more like as you described, center of expertise, knowledge centers or growth analytics centers. What are some of the examples that you guys have seen that we could share with our audience? What could shared services evolve themselves into as sort of the intermediary stage and leapfrog into the next gen? So maybe Simon, we'll start with you.
Okay, as you say, Anirvan, going back at the beginning, shared services and outsourcing, the key driver was to generate transactional work at a lower cost and to focus on labor arbitrage and co-location. And of course, I think over time we've seen that insourcing as opposed to outsourcing has been a trend. And we've also seen that as well as offshoring, we're now moving in the last 2 years at least to virtual GBS ways of working. And I've seen recently some organizations set up in that way. So we've got the best talent working virtually, but using the same technology and the same management reporting to really make that work. So kind of the innovation, I think, at the moment is to think beyond labor arbitrage and cost being the driver, to think a lot more about the customer experience, and to think a lot more about joined up employee experience within what was called the three-legged stool or the triangle model. So yeah, I've seen some good examples recently where, particularly in one example in Asia Pacific, they set up a virtual center rather than asking everybody to move and relocate, because the reality is that people are going to be resistant to relocating. I think as a result of the paradigm shift that the pandemic has caused. We've seen that people can work virtually, so why spend lots of money relocating talent when you can leverage that talent wherever that talent is based? So I see that's the proactivity of trends that are starting to emerge, and it's a risk, but on the other hand, it's a calculated risk because it doesn't cost much to be flexible. It doesn't cost much to listen to employees' needs, and to develop ways of working that respect employees' needs. And it's those companies that don't have the flexibility to do that, which are the ones that are experiencing this so-called great resignation. And the ones that are flexible are being able to manage that effectively.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that those are great examples that you shared, Simon. Tim, going to you, and you and I, we have spoken on this particular topic many a times, right? So there are these transactional shared services, literally sort of the bottom of the bottom on the value chain. And then we see the smattering of these center of expertise or knowledge management hub. What would be some of the let's say, in your opinion, what would be some of those reinventions that the shared services needs to do? Because otherwise it remains so transactional. And if you can't put in a name of what they do, they will remain transactional. They will remain very, very cost conscious organization. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the key thing is to put the G in GBS, right? Global. And eliminate the business, regional, and other type of barriers and silos that make us efficient in terms of capabilities, agility, scale, and how we can drive synergy across the organization. I think part of that as well is for some of the larger GBS organizations is really looking at the footprint and defining which parts of the footprint have which purpose, right? As Simon said, this has grown well beyond just labor arbitrage, right? But there's still a place for that in the footprint for that type of work that needs to be in a good low-cost place. And then you've got other capability areas, and Anirban, you've got KL in your background there, wonderful place, right? It's not going to win the low-cost game anymore, but they've spent a few decades building their capabilities in this industry and expanding into IT and wonderful, amazing set of skills you can get in KL. But it's going to be for incrementally higher cost, but that's okay, because I think you have to look at your footprint and say, I'm put my capabilities over here, and I'm going to prioritize skill and value, and have my other services over here where I can prioritize doing things efficiently and for lower cost, and to strike that balance.
Yep, I like the G in global business services for global. That's a wonderful phrase. Samir, any reflections on what Simon or any built up on what Tim just said?
Yeah, I think just building on that, I think it's also taking process view, if I may say so, which is to say that there's a lot of focus typically, when you look at the growth cycle of a company, even in those functions like commercial excellence, etc. It's typically, like you described, more the back office piece of it, right? Lead generation and stuff like that. But we tend to get stuck on that. I think if we were to step back and look at what's the life cycle, lead generation is obviously important because that's part of it. But then if you go from lead generation to actually solutioning and then sales or contracting and then all the way out to onboarding, if you just take these 4 steps, there's a huge opportunity. And I would argue that not many organizations do that really well. And today, especially with the opportunity with digital, the fact that people, it's becoming a more of a contactless operation all the way end to end, right? People, especially in B2B, in fact, even one could argue more in B2C also. But it's a huge opportunity, which is a broken process. It's typically where the voice of customer NPS is really low because people are not really happy about how they can connect, where GBS can really shine. Because I think if you look at lead generation, there are tech companies doing content development remotely and then, running campaigns remotely on which then they run analytics to see, who could be the primary. So there's a whole opportunity, just lead generation, if you think of it beyond just outbound calls or inbound calls, right? There's a whole thing that you can do. Similarly, when you get into areas like solutioning, I mean, I know of companies, especially I would say in the B2B, I wouldn't say technical space, but even things like home security monitoring or for factories, people who provide technology for that. There's a lot of solutioning that goes in, and a lot of that is actually now happening remotely because you can at least do 70% of that remotely. There's always going to be 20-30%, which is like custom build and requires deep knowledge of the business. But that's a huge opportunity again. And then when you get into contracting side, I mean, that's pretty much given the legal process outsourcing folks, and then depending on your scale, you can do a lot of stuff anyway. And then finally onboarding. I mean, again, I think the tech companies are leading the way in that, but I think it's just a matter of time before other companies are forced to start looking at contactless operations. And you start, if I just take what Simon and Tim said, Simon talked about the change that's coming in. Tim talked about the fact that we need to go global, and the fact that we can go global now because everything for all practical purposes needs to be contactless as a backup option, if not, your primary option. So I think the point is like looking at the process end to end. I think that's where Simon was also going. I think there's a huge opportunity, but it does require change. I mean, the reality is very few companies look at processes end to end. And I think, people talk about end to end, but it's a start, when you start looking at the opportunity.
Right. And I think on the end to end thinking, one of the questions that I would like to ask, you, Samir, and I know that this is an area of passion for you, where you look at some of these new digital startups, and is that in the past, your shared services, your typical makeup of the shared services would be everything was managed in-house. Very little was being done by a fourth party, not even a third party, but a fourth party, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas increasingly we will see digital companies that super specialize in one small area, that it will become one of the features of a standard shared services. How and where do you see the evolution is going to take us on that front, with hyper specialization or hyper specialized solutions?
Yeah, I think the world is moving to, I always look at financial services, right? If you look at the value chain of financial services, there's stuff done by everybody. I mean, you almost need to look at services as a layering of services, right? So you've got somebody who's storing your data, there's somebody who's doing some processing on top of it, there's somebody else who's handling the interaction with the customer, which likely in most cases, like if you look at capital markets, is the secret sauce, and that's what you are doing. But then there's post-trade settlement, which a third party could be doing. There's somebody else providing the platform. So I think that's where the world is going. That, to your point, it's not about point solutions, but I think it's about service brokerage. Like, GBS needs to step out from thinking about it us versus them kind of thing. That thinking, if I don't do it and somebody else does it, then as GBS we lose out. That to me, that's like the budget thinking, right? I lose my budget if somebody else is going to do it. I think the real value is, I think what Tim and or Simon said, how do you wrap the whole thing around? That's really the value. How do you integrate the services, whether you call it a service broker or you call it the service integrator, doesn't matter. But I think that's where the value of GBS comes into play, because it's going to be impossible for organizations of any scale to be able to do everything at the same level of proficiency and effectiveness as, as you said, some specialists are going to be. So the world, I mean, let's just take the Hollywood model. Like I always say that if you look at the Hollywood model, that's what it's built on. It's, you bring in specialists who bring in parts of, people they worked with or specialized teams, and then disband and then they go back together. So I think we are headed in that direction. I think there are certain aspects of, I think the biggest problem right now is cross-border labor movement. And what I mean by that is not physical movement of labor, but working through how do you actually integrate and, bring teams together, literally, have a person in Kuala Lumpur or a person in Manila or a person in, India or wherever. How do you bring them on board and how do you handle the taxation and all that stuff? I think if somebody can work that out, or, there are companies who are doing PEO services. That's the other interesting thing. This whole concept of gig working is kind of getting there. But I think what hasn't been cracked totally is the infrastructure to manage that, as on a global basis. I think there are pockets of excellence, but if we can get past that, I think, to your point, I think this is just going to open up opportunities.
Yeah, I like that, the global thinking. And to your point, we already see that, generation one of shared services showed us that work in large quantities or large volumes could be done from another location. I think now it's the next gen is the miniaturization and living in the virtual world, which is going to be there. What are some of the misconceptions or some of the bottlenecks, constraints that exist in today's shared services, especially the leadership, that's kind of holding back organizations to move forward in the digital age? Maybe we'll start with you, Simon.
Yeah, I think, as you say, the mindset is still for some leaders about siloed activities. Finance is separate from IT, is separate from HR, not opening to procurement or real estate or commercial or marketing services or customer services being part, of the collective group. So sort of old frame of thinking, but I think some observers still see GBS as being a servant, a provider, lower down in the hierarchy of an organization, purely reactive and transactional. And I think those of us who saw the movie Slumdog Millionaire, it's kind of an image that's still logged in the brain of some people, like a mass call center with 1,000 people all on the telephone, And we know that the world's moved on from call center to contact center. But I think a big misperception is where the organization reinforces this thinking and still thinks, I am the customer, you GBS is the supplier. And that creates a dynamic which is not productive, for innovation and for proactive thinking. Whereas if we can build on the point that Samir made, where we can see ourselves as collaborative players, some people are on the payroll, some are in the gig economy, but we're working together, and that we're equal business partners. I think that's where the leaders that think like that and who have the ability to assert that way of thinking will be the ones that really take GBS forward, into the next decade. And it's just making sure that we avoid that trap and we don't fall into the trap of believing it's about customer and supplier, it's about being subservient, and it's about shutting up, when the customer shouts at you. So sadly, that's a perception that was around right at the beginning when people were resistant to the change. And in some people's mind, and in some leaders' mind, and in some CEOs' mind, and some CFOs' mind, and CHROs' mind, to use all of those anagrams, it's still there. But the proactive people will think beyond that.
I love the example, Simon. And in fact, I kind of relate to a few people. I'm sure all of you would be immediately be able to visualize some of those personalities straight away. Tim, is there anything wrong with what Simon said? Hey, after all, shared services leaders, what do you expect them to do? Like, as long as they can deliver things on cost or below cost, as long as they can manage the control and the rules they've put in place. And the other thing is they're seen as people who can manage the stuff that nobody else wants to do. Why do I need to make them innovative? What's in it for them?
No, so Simon kind of nailed my head. I think GBS is a victim of its past success, right? That was its history, and it did it very well. And there's a role for that in the organization. And I think the old mantra was, we're a great service provider. Certainly had its place in time, but now that mindset has to shift. And being a great service provider, it's still there's still a place for that in the mission. But GBS now has to be a good business driver, right? And really understanding the impact it should have on the business and capabilities. And to start with that impact, target the value creation, and then backtrack into, okay, what sort of capabilities, services, skills, things do we need from our GBS organization in order to fill that need? And I always come back to Apple, right? Apple doesn't create devices; they create experiences. The device is the mechanism for the experience, and GBS has to have that same mentality of target the experience, the value, or the impact you're trying to have, and then backtrack to, okay, here's how we can do that.
Right, Samir. What do you think? Do you have kind of similar opinion as Simon and Tim, or do you think, or do you have like a different opinion or another angle to the conversation?
I think just to build on what Tim said, right? I think many GBS organizations were very good at the sort of at scale, and like Simon said, deliver what you committed. I think so. The way I look at it is, and I see this in analytics as well. It's kind of parallel. It's not that if you do something great, you create that need for the service. You've got to have an adopt part of it. So the way I look at it, there's a sort of, you need an adopt and scale engine inside GBS. And I think over the years, what's happened is people have stopped investing in the adopt. And what I mean by adopt is, being there, the customer to understand, okay, this standard service was great so far, but it doesn't meet X, Y, Z of my needs, so therefore there is that latent unsatisfaction, or, there's that latent, I don't know the right word to put it. It's not just about dissatisfaction. There's an irritant in the service. Let me put it that way, right? I think that piece, which doesn't require a lot of resource, but it requires, a small set of people with the right experience to actually do things. And some people, call it design thinking. I think we should just simplify it. It's not just about design thinking, it's just listening to your customer. I think that element of voice of customer, having that customer advocate inside GBS is an area where I think people have taken the pedal off. And it could be a factor around, trying to get efficient, and, that became an easy target, bring those people into operational roles. But I think GBSs that I see who are doing well or pivoting, to build on what the two gentlemen said, moving from the sort of services to a solution mindset, you need people who are dedicated to doing solutions. They can't be the people who are day-to-day doing business as usual operations and then, expected to also start thinking about, new innovations and stuff like that. I think I would just, stop there and say, I think that differentiation, even on the GBS side, between people who are looking ahead of the curve versus people who are, sort of looking at this current horizon of services is very essential.
Right. If we were to look at the way industry is evolving, and not just GBS or shared services, but in general, there's a lot more focus on knowledge, and knowledge being augmented by technology rather than being replaced, right? So this whole focus around augmented knowledge, or artificial intelligence augmented knowledge, right? And then we look at the traditional shared services construct or the configuration, where it's extremely high on human resources, but not necessarily so rich on knowledge, and definitely not advanced in terms of augmented knowledge. What are and if you look at the leaders in this space, almost all of them changed their operating model inside out in order to remain sort of relevant. They had to reinvent themselves. And on the other side, when you go and speak with your conventional, traditional shared services leader, they always tend to take an incremental approach to change rather than dramatically changing everything. Any thoughts on what should be the way that shared services leaders, or for that matter, the executive leadership of companies, need to look at this?
Yeah, I think one way of looking at this is to look at the pace of change, because traditionally we've tended to take a slice by slice, salami approach to change. Let's roll it out in this country, then let's extend it there, and let's extend the service. I think that can facilitate resistance, and it can also limit the ability for people to see the value of that change. So a mindset where we can accelerate change at a faster pace, I think, will help the organization. And actually equipping your GBS team with change management skills, I think, is important as well. Because after all, in many cases, it's them that's leading the implementation of the new ways of working. It's them that's leading tier 0, tier 1, and if you like, deciding what work can be picked up in the center from the outlying countries. So those change leadership skills, those change management skills, the mindset of how do we create adoption? If we're introducing self-service, how do we accelerate and incentivize self-service? And the best organizations are focusing there on fast-paced change, enabling fast change, managing resistance through incentives to change, and performance management for non-change, and also encouraging self-service to reflect our world outside of GBS, where as individuals, we're all now fully on board with self-service. In fact, we're irritated if we can't get to self-service, and we don't mind talking to a robot, to help us. And we don't mind, for example, in my house, I've learned a lot about cooking by asking Alexa, how long do I need to bake potatoes for? Or how long should it take to fry this? So I think we're outside of work, we're kind of embracing self-service, But inside of work, there's still some resistance to self-service. And there again, it's back to the talent skills of the GBS leader and the GBS organization to push for change, and obviously to have the sponsorship from senior leadership for that change, and not to regard this as a 5-year journey, but to say, where can we get to in the next 3 months?
Yeah, I like the way you articulated it. Tim, let me kind of flip it around. And Simon talked about change. What are some of the things that are holding back the shared services leadership team to start thinking along those lines?
Yeah. I guess I could ask Alexa over here, but you asked me, right? I guess the word that comes to mind is agility. And I think, the most successful GBS organizations, agility is part of their DNA. It's their core competency in how they operate. They take in new things, take in new technology, adjust how they work, adjust how they operate, take advantage of that, and they're off and running, and they build that brand of agility. And, agility in terms of also, how they approach their overall scope and mission for the organization. And I think having, a branding and a reputation for agility is really going to help the shared service organization expand its capabilities and move beyond some fixed markers that have been in the ground historically, in the company. And then, being able to expand and do things and show how things can be adopted and run differently and value driven, differently, I think is going to be a key marker for future successful GBS organizations.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I just want to add, I just want to add one point. I couldn't resist what Tim said about the agility part. I think, to me, the marker is that if I ask someone, how long has this SOP existed? And if someone's very proud to say that, we haven't changed the SOP in 3 years, well, then you've got a problem, right? To the point of because you can't have a branding of agile, because it's becoming reality about retaining talent. I mean, folks who, you almost need to look at segmenting your users as well, because there will be some users who are going to keep calling. I recognize the self-service piece, but you're going to have a layer of users who are going to call. I mean, the fact that you have these white glove VIP users, so to speak, it just exists, right? And then there's an element of self-service. And I think that's really where the innovation is, because even from a GBS perspective, whether it's internal or, with a third party, you've got a whole set of users on the one hand who like to do things themselves and want to be, want a channel like that. And on the other hand, you have people in GBS who are dying to do that kind of work, especially, people who've graduated in the last 4 or 5 years and want to do that kind of work. So, if you segment it out and say, put these users and these GBS folks together, and, you can get a lot of magic, which then percolates, or if it doesn't percolate, even if it hits 70% of the population, because let's face it, they're going to be the users and leaders of tomorrow. So if you can start growing with them jointly, and I think that element of collaboration exists, at that level, or, that whichever generation it is, I always get it wrong, millennial or generation Z or X, but folks, I think on both sides are more amenable to experimentation, which, may not exist at other levels so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I like what you said about the SOP, because I think for shared services, it's the agility, and then also this continuous expansion of capabilities and scope that is really the engine for driving value through GBS. GBS organizations that are static, don't expand what they do, eventually you run into issues. It's almost like if a fish stops swimming, it dies, right? It sinks. And so you need those new things coming in to be able to then give your organizations new challenges and then put them onto different paths. But as well as to provide that broader scope of service to the organization. So it's both a value to the organization itself, but also essential for shared services to have new stuff coming in. So if you create efficiencies over here, you can then redeploy your valuable skills and capabilities over to this new stuff coming in over here and be off and running. So it's a pretty fundamental element of a GBS model, I think.
Yeah, it goes back to Simon's pool and wave, that's stuck in my mind as well.
It's dynamic, isn't it, as a wave? Because as you say, as you can introduce self-service and technology, you can move your team up the value chain, and that can either be vertical or or lateral in terms of going into a new area and bringing that into what GBS can offer as a service as well. You're right. I mean, the service catalog or the service offer should not be static, but it's how that work gets done and how it creates the opportunity for you to get into new areas of work, which is the entrepreneurial piece, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, this also kind of, you guys mentioned about the SOP, and literally a few days back, I was listening to this podcast, and this particular guy, he runs a software company called Trainual, and what they do is essentially they take processes and they talk about documentation, but they talk about documentation from a new age thinking, right? So they say, hey, listen, how many times have you seen SOPs? Like, the example that you talked about, Samir, the 3 years, the SOPs never change. The chances are that the SOPs, once they've been put in some sort of a file, whether it's virtual file or physical file, very few people would actually go back and take a look at it, right? And part of the reason is that it's a very static a description of what is there, versus we're living in dynamic world. Things are changing. What is important, which does not get captured, is the contextual knowledge. It'll tell you, yes, you need to do it XYZ, but it never tells you why or under what context, under what condition do you need to do that. The second thing is the use of multimedia. Some companies have already started using some audio files or video files, but how many times have you seen anybody who's joining new, onboarding, that they actually have the ability to go through video tutorials of learning skills, not just onboarding, but literally that this is the way I need to process invoices, right? And then the third thing is today's day and age, I think somebody you mentioned about the collaboration, right? You need to have a strong collaboration platform within potentially shared services where you can exchange information, you can update the documents, you can put in new images or whatever, new videos as it happens. And that's how you enrich. You take the document management and make it a knowledge-centric or a knowledge management company, right? These are the places where I find that many of the shared services still, because of the cost-centric thinking, are missing out a humongous opportunity to kind of leapfrog to the next level.
Yeah, I'll just give you an example. I remember Cisco many years ago used to use a platform called Jive, which allowed collaborative problem solving. So this was actually customers getting together on a portal. It was just a basic portal, and they would get together and solve each other's problems. It was moderated by somebody on the Cisco side to make sure there was information was accurate and or just making sure things were running fine. But more or less it was the users helping users kind of thing, right? And it was great because for Cisco they could identify potential customers with needs, as well as actually it became a great talent hunting ground for them because they found out folks who really knew their product really well. But that kind of thinking, I've rarely seen it being done inside the organization, and I think and that's why I think it's changing now. I think that point about videos is very apt, because every time a client asks me about we are launching this, we need SOPs, I'm like, no, you don't need SOPs. To start with, yes, you need some basics, but just give just unleash it, make it fun. Let's just say each group, take out your iPad or whatever phone you use, and then just record what you're doing and just let it be raw. It doesn't have to be a perfect SOP. And 2-minute slices of those and a bunch of those are much more valuable than sending out these PowerPoints or Word documents, because nobody reads them. And today people are so used to, I need to make an expense report. I want to know how to, I just need 2 minutes to know how to create an expense line. I don't want to go through 100 pages to get there, right? So I think that's where the change is coming as well.
Yeah, that's a futuristic way of looking at it, but it's also a current way that some people look at it, isn't it? In terms of, I need to know how to do something. Oh, let me YouTube it. And as you say, with videos which can be created within the collaborative group, they're short, but they're powerful in the sense that you've got both the words, the music, the tone of voice, and the dance in terms of the body language and enthusiasm. And that's far more powerful than a static, very structured document. And particularly where you've got these videos where even the words that come up, can be recorded, and the chat room can be used to exchange ideas, I think is a good way forward for sharing knowledge. And the collaborative tools, of chat and of some of the tools like Slack, I think really help, particularly with the generations that are emerging, the people that are joining GBS and the people that will be managers and team leaders of GBS in the next few years.
Absolutely, and I think the personality in video is very different from the codified black and white words and sentences in a document, right? Because and I think that's a great learning experience, because if and somehow I think many of us or many organizations completely miss the point, which is if everybody got skilled by reading a book, then there wouldn't be any videos or any audios for that matter, right? Videos have in general much bigger traction when it comes to knowledge retention than reading a book would be, and I'm absolutely not surprised why more and more organizations have started going that route. Tim, let's get your views on videos and gamification of the next gen shared services, and maybe some thoughts on gamification.
I guess my thought is, meet your target employees, where they live, right, and where they operate, and how they operate. And I think it's essential for GBS organizations, any organizations, right, to make that shift. And instead of defining how you want to communicate, how you want to engage with people, start with how they want to be communicated to, how they want to engage, and then let that then drive your strategy for employee and stakeholder engagement. I think even extending that to how they engage outwardly with various business stakeholders is essential to think about. Again, as Simon said, I don't want a 100-page book, to read how to do an expense report. Meet me on my terms, where your mechanism, your mode of communication, and what you say is going to resonate with me.
Yeah, and I think to your point there, Tim, it's about the leader listening, and it's about the leader valuing the diversity and inclusion of their team. Mm-hmm. For example, where people learn in different ways. The theorist may read a book, but the pragmatist or the activist may want to, have a go and learn from having a go. And it's recognizing that different strokes for different folks, and even things like virtual working versus office working. It's true that some people are desperate to get back into the office because they value they get their energy from extroverting, from collaborating and brainstorming in the same room as somebody else, or having a coffee in the same office. And there are others that are really introverted in their preferred thinking style. They think it's fantastic that they can work from home. There's no interruptions. They can polish their thoughts, and they can produce their work. And like you said, also with gamification, it's like Marmite. You either love it or hate it. If you're achievement motivated, and I love games and gamification, and I want to sort of get up the scoreboard, but some people are not motivated by that at all. So if the leader can recognize their team as individuals and communicate in a way which suits those individuals, they're very much more likely to be able to engage and retain that team.
And I think technology can also help, to your point, in terms of, identifying, people's preferences and needs, even if they're not explicitly stated, because some people actually hesitate on surveys to, say, to make the point, right, that because FaceTime may be very important in that culture, right, and that being there, whereas actually they would rather, do hybrid or just come in occasionally and face-to-face contact. But on the other hand, if you start tracking it in terms of, again, using these collaborative platforms, if people are pushing out videos out there, or, some people are writing more articles, you can start identifying at least knowledge. I think the talent base tracking is also changing. Earlier it used to be about, I've done this project, so therefore I have, that skill, so to speak, but that's not really the skill. The skill is what did you know about that? Was it about, was it about the process design? Was it the analytics that went into that process, or what was it? At that sort of slice of skill level, which is now, you can track, or, there are a lot of platforms out there. I think that's becoming very critical. I mean, one of our, organizations, sub-organizations in McKinsey called Quantum Black did a study a couple of years back where they found that if the same people worked on a project thrice, for a duration of even a month each, the chances of success of those projects went up like 70-80%. So the idea was that how do you get people to work, in the initial period, at least thrice, or, figure out those combinations, because when you're making a team, it's very easy for technology to do the match, right? If you have these people available, but getting those people together, it was a big insight. I mean, some of it is intuitive. Obviously, you work together, you know the norms and stuff like that. But if you actually start, configuring teams, and as, GBS moves to more agile models where people move around, I think it'll become very critical, not just skills, but also matching personalities using technology. And that's when technology, all this AI and all this stuff really starts giving measurable value.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, apart from agility, how important is the knowledge centricity is going to play in the coming years for shared services?
I think it's going to be like today, process excellence and, meeting SLAs is sort of the hygiene factor. I think knowledge is the frontier. It's already there. I think part of the reason why stakeholders don't sort of, or where stakeholders promote GBS and, use it as a strategic weapon is where they see value in terms of GBS knowing the business. So it's not just about knowing the process, but knowing the end-to-end business. I think that is paramount. And there is no excuse for a GBS leader not to be thinking about that, because, I think it's a matter of survival at that point.
Makes sense, Simon?
So yeah, I think just agree very much with Samir there. I think that the GBS leader has to be in touch with the whole organization, has to be in touch with the business strategy, and has to align, with where the business needs to go. So that means their knowledge is not just about the processes and systems within their function, but it's about understanding the overall organization. Because only by doing that can they really leverage the best out of their own functionality. And I think it's growing, and I think we're all now a lot more focusing on knowledge than we were, let's say, 10 years ago. And we're 24/7 in terms of how we're using Google and other technologies to answer our questions, or in my case, Alexa, to help me cook better. But I think that it just will become incremental, because knowledge is a lot more accessible now than it was 10 years ago. And you don't have to go to the library to pick up knowledge.
Yeah, one of the things that people say is people who are part of the knowledge economy, they tend to get a lot more traction when they actually produce versus when they consume. So in other words, when you actually start writing blogs, and I've seen that also work with me, and I'm sure all of you have written stuff, right? When you actually write some stuff, because it makes you think, it enriches the understanding, the level of knowledge that you have. And yet, large number of organizations have not created any sort of platform, or have not been encouraging their people to share their knowledge through blogs or articles. We still end up using external platforms, right? So how important do you think that should be when it comes to encouraging that knowledge build or knowledge development in an organization? Writing articles, blogs, sharing it within the organization.
I think, if you just look at what the headlines I read, especially in the Indian press these days, right, where every major provider is nobody's sub 20% attrition. I mean, this was like, these people used to say that high attrition happens in contact centers because of the nature of the population and, turnover. But this is like digital technology, business services, 20% plus attrition is unheard of. Like, it hasn't been around, right? Which just states the point that knowledge management becomes, the fundamentals of knowledge management become almost like business continuity now. So I think what you're saying about the blogs, etc., I think is the next level of, identifying the subject matter experts and sort of building on it. But I think right now knowledge management is almost a imperative for continuity, because I think even organizations that claim to have had, great knowledge management platforms, I think the proof of the pudding is, okay, how fast did you retrain or, cross-board a, employee when someone else left, right? So I think there's a sort of two sides of it. There's just the basics, and then there's, building on that, go towards excellence.
And I think you're right, Irvin, in terms of when one's writing a blog, it does sort of help you to revisit your thinking in terms of how did I arrive at that conclusion. So that is powerful for the person initiating the blog. I think it's also quite good for collaboration and team working when that blog is read by others and it provokes a discussion, within the team. But I think it's also true that you said that this tends to be more external, where we're using LinkedIn or Facebook or other ways to get our knowledge out there, or to receive some kind of recognition in the form of a like or a smiley face. And maybe sometimes it's cultural within an organization. Is it okay to stick my head above the parapet? Is it okay to say what I really think rather than what is politically correct thing to say? And I think some organizations are still in the early stages of dealing with that. I mean, there are lots of collaborative platforms like Yammer or indeed, many others within the information systems that you're using. But I very much think it's down to how open is the culture to promote that, and are there any risks if you say something controversial on that platform?
Wonderful, and I think that kind of nicely segues into my penultimate question, which is, when we think about the future, and when we think literally from a sort of a Netflix or movies perspective, we look at AR, which is augmented reality, artificial intelligence, or virtual reality with those boxes or VR glasses. What does the future of shared services look like in, let's say, 5 to 7 years? So maybe Tim, we'll start with you. You can ask Alexa, right?
Right, ask Alexa. The first term that came to mind actually was metaverse, right? All about the metaverse, and that's where we're actually going to live and work and operate. And there's actually some part of it's not far-fetched. It's actually going to be true. But yeah, I think in the future, I think the history of GBS, where it's come from, as provide a lot of value, but that's in the past. And I think going forward, it really is about being an agile organization and then putting itself on the front line of the business to drive value. And like I said, it's really about understanding the impact it could have, or the business value that can be created, and then what's the solution that's required, and kind of going from the back office, waiting the phone to ring, to being a front office driving the business partner is going to be essential for GBS.
Wonderful. Simon.
Well, I'm not sure whether in the next 5 to 7 years GBS will be run by avatars, but I do think there's going to be more robotics. I mean, a lot of invoices get processed by our 7 or 8 robots. I think there's going to be a lot more chatbotting and tier 1 services using AI. I think, as mentioned earlier, the whole onboarding process and checklist for a new employee can happen in 3 minutes using 33 different artificial intelligent connections. So all of that's going to grow. I hope, based on our conversation, that people will recognize the value of data, data being the diamond for an organization that wants to make good forecasting and good decisions. And so if we can join up those opportunities of how we use the data that we collect, I think that will be part of the future. I'd like to see less of a silo between GBS and centers of expertise, because that will enable people to move up the value chain. And particularly in this area of data, there's not a big stretch between data management and data analytics and data science. if we can create that career pathway. I think more collaboration as we start to utilize the collaborative tools, and more partnership. Probably also, as Samir mentioned, a bit more gig working, where you supplement your teams with consultants or experts that come in, rather than like in American football, you bring on the kicker, they take the kick and then they go off again. They've done their job. That kind of thing, I think, would happen as well. And I think to Tim's point, global organizations, not local organizations, not we must be in this region organization, but organizations that really reach out and can operate together globally. I think that would be an increasing trend in the next 5 to 7 years.
Wonderful summing up. Thanks for that, Simon. Samir.
Just to build on that, I think some of this is already here. Like, I hear of some service providers who are using AR and VR for onboarding their employees, particularly in the last year or so, given the situation where you can't be in the same sort of big campuses for training. So it's already happening. And I think the other side of it is just, once that technology settles down, people get comfortable with it, it'll be taking that same concept on the adopt side, like new services or solution design with customers, whether internal or external. I think that's just waiting to happen. I think the question right now is only investment. And I think the key thing is, I think the big elephant in the room is that who's going to invest in this, right? Like most GBS organizations are already, constrained. They're being, they're being looked at in terms of stepping up productivity from 5%, 10%, 20% a year, but, with no corresponding investments coming in. So I think the key thing will be like, people who are willing to make that investment upfront will start reaping it in. Otherwise, it's going to be a tough, it's something that GBS organizations need to do, but it'll just be a very tough climb for those.
Yep, absolutely. And probably this time we'll not ask Alexa, but we'll ask Siri, who's going to invest in the next gen revolution of shared services. So with that, we are literally have come towards the end of the program. But before we go, any sort of last or final thoughts? And also, some people may want to reach out to you, connect with you, and continue the conversation. So what's the best way to reach to you? So we'll start with Tim from your perspective.
Yeah. No, I think I guess my concluding thought is, and I haven't listened to all the insight on the panel here, is I think the future for GBS has never been brighter and more exciting. I think a lot of hard work's going into getting GBS to where it is today. Building up those capabilities, going through those transitions, proving its value. And now we're at this point in time when GBS can really leverage the capabilities to expand its role in the business, but also then take advantage of what's going on out in the world, whether it's remote work, new technologies coming online, and be able to kind of connect all these dots and really create an exciting, dynamic future for the organization.
Wonderful. And what's the best way, unless you don't want people to reach out to you, or you say Siri?
Siri, yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. Our company website as well is connectedinsight.com. So connected-insight.com is a good place to reach us.
Wonderful. And we'll put them in the description box for YouTube as well as for podcast.
Okay.
Samir.
I found this on the web.
I didn't do it. You said the magic word and activated it. So sorry.
Yeah.
I realized it was on.
Yeah, no, I think LinkedIn is best. I think it's on the invitation for this webinar as well. So that's the best way.
Right. Any concluding thoughts from your side on the topic?
I mean, I'm a cricket lover, right? I think it's still the sort of first innings of the test, so to speak, at this point. Probably, going into the second day of the match. So I think it's just it's very early stage for a whole new set of opportunities which are there to be uncovered.
Thank you, Samir. Simon.
Yes, I'm a cricket lover as well, Samir, but I'm not going to say too much about the Australian Test series. Yeah, GBS is an exciting place to be, particularly for those who embrace change and continuous improvement. And I've really enjoyed that journey. I can be contacted on LinkedIn as well, but there are a lot of people with the surname of Brown, So I'm Simon Brown, and you'll see on my logo there on LinkedIn that I'm passionate about change management, and I'm passionate about coaching and mentoring others. So if you want to reach out to me based on my experience, I'm happy to be open for coaching and mentoring.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I think it's a very nice way of, bringing the event, the episode, today's episode to closure. But before I go, I think you guys have already said it out loud. We are literally on the fence of this major revolution. Digital has disrupted industry after industry over the last 10 years, especially over the last 10 years, especially from the time when 4G was advented. The way things have changed. Nobody knew the existence of Facebook or even the booking.coms or some of these app-based let's say app-based technologies that exist in our lives. All of them happened literally around the time when 4G was there. Now 5G is knocking at our doors, and it probably is going to again revolutionize the way we do things. From a GBS perspective, we have gone through the last 20-25 years in a kind of a fixed model. And here's an opportunity for us to leapfrog completely to the next level. The question is, what's in store in the future? It's going to be very exciting times, that I can promise. What will it be? It's still early days, as some of you pointed out. But definitely, this is absolutely exciting, as Simon, you pointed out. The time to be in GBS, and the way Tim, you articulated, whether it's Alexa or Siri, the answers are there. We just need to be able to find them. Ladies and gentlemen, it was a pleasure to have our esteemed panelists, Tim Sheridan, Samir Singh, and Simon Brown join us in today's episode. There are 5 more episodes that are going to come in. We're going to broadcast them live on LinkedIn as well as on YouTube. They are going to be every alternate Tuesdays between 2 o'clock CET or Central European Time till 3:30 Central European Time. So if you want to watch them live, join us through the LinkedIn Live, or if you want to watch the videos or listen to the podcast, then get in touch with us or follow our page on LinkedIn. We will share the details. With that, I would wish all of you stay healthy, stay safe in whatever part of the world, and let's hope that we're going to have a lot more real world than the virtual world we've been living in over the last couple of years. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.